Hello all, this is Daniel Berman, USCF Expert 2131. It's been several years since I've done a video, and I decided to come back and show you an opening called the Lange Attack, which was one of my favorite openings. And when I was 1600, I beat a 2299 in a club championship at the Santa Monica Bay Chess Club. For today, I'm going to go over the main line and to show you how forcing this opening is and how any inaccurate move can be deadly. So let's begin. The first move is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4. By the way, you can also transpose into this by the Joko piano by playing bishop c4. The same opening, I'm going to play d4, pawn takes pawn, bishop c4, bishop c5, castles, knight f6, e5, and d5. Instead of moving the knight, Black counterattacks in the center with d5. The main line here for the Max Lange is pawn takes knight, pawn takes bishop, rook e1 check, bishop e6, and knight g5. So this is what they call the tabia of this opening, the beginning of where everything gets interesting. Here, if Black plays one small inaccuracy, he will lose. And I want to show you the inaccuracies that can be played and how to punish it and what you should do. So the best move here is queen d5, protecting the bishop. Actually, queen d5 protects both bishops, which is quite important. Now let's take a look at what would happen if instead of queen takes d5, queen takes pawn, guarding the bishop on e6. You end up losing a piece in this variation because of knight takes bishop, pawn takes, and queen h5 check, forking the king and the bishop on c5. After knight g5, if Black were to play queen d6, guarding both bishops, there's another win for white, which is pawn takes pawn, forcing the rook to go to g8, followed by rook takes bishop, pawn takes, and queen h5 check. So here Black has three moves. King d8, which loses to knight fork, winning the queen. King e7, which loses the rook on g8 because the king's forced to go back, and you just take the rook. And the only playable, somewhat playable move is king to d7. And here, just knight to e4 forks the queen and the bishop. And if you can see, the bishop's being double attacked by the knight and the queen on h5. Back in this position again, the only move is queen d5. So in this position, there is four possible moves for Black. Queen takes pawn, queen d7, queen d6, and queen d5, and only queen d5 does not lose a piece. So let's continue. Now another forcing move for white, knight c3, and you can't take because of queen takes queen, winning the queen because the bishop's pinned against the king. So on knight to c3, queen goes to f5, only move, knight to e4, and now Black gets some breathing room. You can castle queenside. The move here is g4, hitting the queen. And the queen still has to protect the bishop on c5, so the queen has two squares, e5 and d5. One is good, one is not good. So let's look at the not good one first. Queen d5, and another forcing move is pawn takes pawn, and the rook only has two squares, g8 and e8. So let's say he goes to g8. The knight f6 forks the queen and the rook, winning for white. Same thing with e8. So queen d5 is a mistake. The only move here is queen to e5. White plays knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, pawn takes g7, rook to g8, and bishop h6, holding the pawn on g7. d3, with the idea that he wants to open up the rook on d8 against the queen on d1, and white does not want to allow that, so he'll play c3, d2, and in this position, white's attacking d2 three times, with the knight on e4, the bishop on h6, and the queen on d1. And Black's only guarding it once with the rook on d8. But what would happen if white tried to take that pawn with knight takes d2? Well, it's disastrous. After bishop takes f2, king takes f2, and queen h2, forking the king and the bishop on h6. And if you look, the knight's going to be weak too after the capture of the bishop on h6. So here, the best move is rook to e2. Rook to d3. And the threat for Black is to go to rook to h3 with a threat of attacking the pawn on h2 twice with the queen and the rook, and also attacking this bishop, queen f1. And it's also important to note that the queen on f1 releases the square d1. If Black could get another piece on the d file, he could queen. So that's his next move. Queen d5, he's threatening the queen. And now white has, just in time, the ability to play rook to d1. And the old line in this variation, black wanted to get a draw. So he used to play knight to e5, threatening knight f3 check. Queen g2, knight f3, king f1, knight to h4, attacking the queen. Queen to g1, the queen can't go up to the third rank because of the rook on d3. Knight f3 again, hoping that the position will repeat and the game would be a draw, but white says no and plays queen to g3, which looks like a possible mistake because the rook is attacking the queen indirectly if once the knight moves. And if a knight can go someplace good, let's say knight to d4, the rook's attacking the queen and the knight's attacking the rook on e2, it looks like you win the exchange. But white's okay with that, so he will gladly give up the queen for this position. So pawn takes knight, rook takes queen, pawn takes rook, and bishop takes d4, followed by rook takes d2. So if we look at this position, the bishop on d4 is pinned to the queen, and white is also threatening eventually knight to f6, forking the rook and the queen, but he can't do so just yet because of queen to h1 mate. So let's just say that black plays a non-move, like b6. And if white tries to win the exchange, queen h1 is checkmate. So that wouldn't be good. So in this position, white's winning because his eventual plan would be to play king to g1 and then followed by knight to f6, forking. And the bishop is pinned to the queen. So this is a very, very good position for white. So let's go back to the main line. On rook d1, instead of black playing knight to e5, the best move is bishop to e7, stopping the knight going to f6. Queen g2, knight to e5, rook takes d2, knight to f7, trying to get rid of that bishop, g5, knight takes, rook takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, queen h5, forking the rook on d1 and the pawn on h6, takes, rook g3 guarding g7, bishop h4, rook g4, queen check, queen blocks, queen back to h6, again trying to get a draw, and queen to c4. Rook takes pawn, knight to c5, queen f6, attacking f2, f3, e5, rook takes rook, queen takes check, king to f1, and queen e7, guarding the bishop. Check, king b8, knight to d7, king a8, and knight to f6, threatening mate on c8, and also causing interference between the queen and the bishop, and now the bishop's attacked. So in this variation, black would lose a piece and would be forced to resign. So this is why I like this opening. It's very tactical, it's very forcing, and even a 1600 can play a 2299 by just memorizing a few moves. So I encourage you to give it a try, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.